So after a start that pretty much everybody agreed was fantastic, The Last of Us is now on the cancelled list. But why? Hi y'all, Snarky J Cosplay here. So on Sunday night, as scheduled, episode 3 of HBO Max's The Last of Us got dropped for streaming. And it actually stirred up an insane amount of controversy that I was not expecting. I'm gonna go ahead and let you know that this video is going to be filled with spoilers, so unless you want episode 3 of The Last of Us ruined for you, you might not want to watch this one. So what's going on in this episode? Episode 3 introduces us to a fan favorite character from the video games whose name is Bill, and in the show he is portrayed by none other than Nick Offerman, who you might know from his role as Ron Swanson in Parks and Rec. Of course, when you're playing The Last of Us and you encounter Bill, it's just that. It's your interactions with Bill. Now, if you do a little more digging, like some people have, you can find a series of letters from somebody named Frank in the game. Now, Frank seems to have been a companion to Bill. If you read a little more into it, you might actually come to the conclusion that Frank and Bill were an item and not just buddies trying to live out the apocalypse together. Regardless of how you interpreted it though, Frank is no longer in Bill's life at the time that you meet him. As I mentioned previously, the show deviates from this in a big way. Episode 3 actually does a lot to expand on Bill's life with Frank. Bill and Frank are actually shown as a couple, and a large chunk of the episode is spent showing flashbacks and different scenes from Bill and Frank's lives together. Because the episode spends so much time on their relationship, it doesn't necessarily advance the main story of The Last of Us all that far. However, that's really not why people are complaining. People on the internet are up in arms and talking about boycotting it and having to skip things. I mean, listen, the comments are abound. I'm not kidding. I mean, check these out. All kinds of folks complaining that it either offended their sensibilities, or it was a snooze fest, or come on HBO, they didn't show up here for that. And in my opinion, I think that this is kind of ridiculous. We're in the year 2023. Homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual, whatever. Love is love, and I think that this story is worth telling, especially because it's something that people kind of have to pick up on if they search a little bit in the game. I think making it a point to show this part of his life was interesting. I don't understand why people are that upset about it, but as I've said in multiple videos, I think people just like to be mad. Okay, so two dudes wanted to hold hands. What's your problem, bro? I feel like if you're that pissed off about it, maybe you need to take a look in the mirror. Maybe you need somebody to hold your hand. Find somebody, you know, just be less mad. Now, I will say, I don't think that such an immense fraction of the episode needed to be spent on this love story. Why? Well, I used to watch The Walking Dead, and I thought the first 2 or 3 seasons were absolutely fantastic, but once the episodes sort of started devolving into just human drama that happened to be set against a background of zombies, I started getting bored. And this episode did start to make me feel like, hey, we're gonna take a break from this really cool outbreak and this post-apocalyptic road trip story between Ellie and Joel and start to tell you the story of a side character that's really not gonna matter moving forward. But I do also acknowledge that it would have been really hard to paint Bill as the simple character that he was in the game. Bill's just a side character in The Last of Us, but he is one of those characters that made a huge impact on gamers and pretty much anybody who even watched playthroughs of The Last of Us. Why? Well, he's kind of crotchety, and one of his big things is that he sets up booby traps.
You said traps!
All over this sort of compound that he lives on. Guy is a real pain in the neck for players, and he's actually a lot of fun in the game, especially because he's got incredible banter with Ellie, who can't stand him, and also because those traps are such a challenging but really fun part of the game. You spend a pretty substantial amount of time trying to avoid tripwires and all kinds of things that will eventually lead to Joel's demise. Imagine if they had spent 15 to 20 minutes of this episode just showing Joel and Ellie try and survive all of Bill's traps. While it's challenging and fun in the video game, and I hate to admit how many of Bill's traps I fell into, I've played the game 4 times and he still gets me. That might be more of a reflection on how bad I am at video games and not how good Bill is at setting traps, but that's neither here nor there.
Idiot.
My point here is that nobody would have spent 20 minutes watching Pedro Pascal try and dodge traps set by Nick Offerman. I mean, I might have because I love Nick Offerman and Pedro Pascal, but it just wouldn't have been as entertaining television. Additionally, a lot of the fun banter and interactions between these characters does sort of just occur as actions are happening within the game, so it's kind of hard to translate video games so literally to TV or movies without it coming across as hokey or sort of dragging. And though I do admit that this episode didn't do much to advance like the physical story of The Last of Us, I do have to say that if you dig a little bit deeper and you try to put your literary analysis hat on, yes, I aced my English classes in high school, thank you very much. It does actually advance the story as far as Joel is concerned, because Joel, who is so initially detached from Ellie and making a conscious effort to stay detached from her, is now starting to figure out a little bit more about what love is in this apocalypse. And so we're gonna start seeing that father-daughter relationship that is so prevalent in the game really start to develop in the show. So I think that this is actually a great move exposition-wise. I'm just hoping that this episode isn't a sign of more things to come. Just the incredibly extra exposition on characters that at the end of the day really don't have that big an impact on the story. What I'm most interested in is the story of Joel and Ellie, and if they give us some extras of Joel and Ellie, I'll be totally cool with that. I just really don't need all this extra exposition for characters that, again, don't have that much of an impact on the story. It starts to make the show feel like it's dragging, and since I and a lot of other people have already played the games, you sort of start to feel like, okay, when are we getting to this next part? Because unfortunately, we already know what's gonna happen. I think that big narrative shifts like this do kind of trip up people who already think they know what's gonna happen. I didn't really expect any of this when I went into this episode, and while I did enjoy it, it did feel a lot slower than the first two episodes, which I thought were absolutely fantastic. And again, that physical story was not really progressed as much, so it did almost start to feel like filler. I would have loved to see a little more banter between Bill and Ellie, because for me that was a highlight in the first game, but we can't have it all. To those that are crying that the show has gone woke and that they're gonna boycott and they're so upset and blah 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 blah, yeah, keep yelling in the comments sections, buddy. HBO Max is still making their money, the show is already greenlit for season 2, and guess what? Dudes are gonna be kissing long after you're done complaining. That's all from me. I've been Snarky J. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know your thoughts on this controversy surrounding episode 3 of The Last of Us in the comments below.